So we're back for another study this week as we are still sort of quarantined away from the crowd at Highland Park. Will and I have Travis Creasy joining us again as we did Sunday night, and we're going to study a little bit again with him. We also have Blake Holloman, who's a member at Highland Park.
No stranger
to Highland Park crew, but if you're watching from elsewhere, you might not know Blake, but Blake is going to join us, and we're all going to study together. He helps Will a lot with the youth group and does a lot of things with them, and so he will be a great benefit to us as well. So today we're going to dive into Luke 15 just a little bit. We all have a couple of different things that we're going to share from this passage together. Luke 15 is a passage where Jesus is talking about a lot of lost things. He mentions the lost sheep. He mentions the lost coin, and of course the lost son, or the prodigal son as we've come to know it. When he's telling those first two parables, of course, he's wanting them to understand some things, and I think most of us understand that. He's sort of referencing the old way of doing things, the old law, and the Israelites or the Jews not accepting Christ, I guess, and of course we use that a little bit towards the fact that there's a lot of people who walk away from Christ or have never come to him to begin with. I think the third story especially really illustrates that well, and sort of about the responses that we have. So we see three people in the third parable. It's going to start in Luke 15, verse 11, and Blake's going to read that for us in just a minute. As you listen to it, I want you to pay attention to the different characters, because you really have three characters that stand out. A lot of times we think about the prodigal son, but there's two other characters in the story that we're going to talk about, each one of them sort of in different ways and in different lights. So I'm going to turn it over and let Blake read for us the story from verses 11 through verse 32.
Okay, we're in Luke 15, starting in verse 11. He also said, a man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate I have coming to me. So he distributed the assets to them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered together all he had and traveled to a distant country where he had squandered his estate in foolish living. After he had spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he had nothing. Then he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. He longed to eat his fill from the carob pods the pigs were eating, but no one would give him any. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up, go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired hands. So he got up and went to his father. But while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father told his slaves, Quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then bring the fattened calf and slaughter it, and let's celebrate with a feast. Because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. As he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants and asked what these things meant. Your brother is here, he told him, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and didn't want to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. But he replied to his father, Look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him. Son, he said to him, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.
And so we got a story of, again, the prodigal son, who is the younger son. You got the older son who stayed faithful, been there for the father, has done all the things that he wanted him to do. And then you have the father, who is, in the other two parables, you have the people who went out and looked for the lost coin or the lost sheep. In this one, the father sort of stays back. He's not going out looking for this prodigal son, but he's sitting there waiting. And so Travis has got a couple of thoughts he wanted to share with us, just kind of about the dynamics of fathers and their sons, even going back into the Old Testament. And so I'm going to let him kind of jump in and share a few of those thoughts with us.
You'll have to bear with me, okay, because I'm going to try to connect the dots here. But you look at who Jesus is possibly talking to there in the story of the prodigal son, or the lost items as well. He's talking to people who would have been at least familiar with the Old Testament. And so this idea of brothers and their fathers is a running theme throughout the Old Testament. This is not something that's new to them. Most of us have some familiarity. Either myself, I have an older brother and a younger brother, so I'm the middle brother, so maybe I have a little more to explain here or a little more skin in the game. But, if you've got a sibling of any sort, there's always been that when you're a kid, you're like, who's the favorite, and you want to, that sometimes is a discussion. And the Old Testament is really kind of clear on a lot of occasions who the favorite is. And so you look at the countercultural idea of the Old Testament, and in several occasions, this is one of them. In that day and age, the firstborn son is the one who gets all the good stuff, right? But you see over and over again, and I think you can go back and maybe even make a discussion with Abraham, but especially with Isaac. Isaac's not the firstborn son, right? We have Isaac, we have Ishmael. Isaac is talked about as unique. In some versions, it might even say begotten, the same word that is referenced Jesus. And so Isaac receives the blessing. Well, Isaac, guess what? He goes on and has a son, or two sons, Esau and Jacob, who gets the blessing. Jacob receives the blessing. He's the second born, although they're born at almost the exact same time. You see that, he goes, he's sent off to go and get married, and he's supposed to find a wife. And guess what? Who he wants? He wants the sister, the second sister, right? He ends up with Leah, and Leah has all the children. And so you have this whole discussion and all these stories that go on in the Old Testament. And so then you see that Jacob comes back and he tries to make it up with Esau, and there's this whole discussion there. And so you fast forward, it keeps going. Guess what? Joseph, right? Joseph is the chosen one of God to continue on this promise that's going to be brought to these people, that all the world's people will be blessed by. And so that goes on. So, you can look at Aaron and Moses and their relationship, and then you get to Exodus chapter 4. And in verse 22 through 23, God is telling Moses what he's going to go say, right? He tells him, he says, "Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son," right? And I think a lot of people have made the connection in the prodigal son, who the older brother represents. Most people would say, well, that's Israel. And so here we see my firstborn son, Israel. "And I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son." So, I can remember looking at John 3:16, and we'll head there next. And I think about when I saw the word begotten, or, I oftentimes equated that as first, now that's my crazy brain. But really what it means is unique. This is my son, and he is unique. So John chapter 3, verse 16, we're all very familiar with that. But "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." It says his only son, for God did not send his son in the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. And so I think there, when you look at only and you compare it with the Exodus verse, there's some discussion there. And really what this is to get your brain working and your mind working and kind of work through it yourself. But you also see where Jesus leaves heaven he comes to earth and he becomes our sin, right? He takes on our sin to the point that, we've often heard people say that God can't even be around him. My God, why have you forsaken me? And so we see this where Jesus, once again, is kind of putting himself in this place of, I want to reconcile. And so obviously we know that Jesus plays the part of the Son. He is the Son, but he also is the Father. And so there's so many different levels that we can connect on in the prodigal son. I think that we can look at every situation. I think that some of you guys are going to comment on this and really put ourselves in that place. How would I react? Would I be humble enough? We go back to when Jacob returns to Esau and he bows to him 7 times, and gives him all these gifts. He comes to himself and realizes. Now, when you come face to face with God, that helps you realize some things. That might humble you a little bit. So he comes back. Well, what happens in the prodigal son? He comes to himself. I love that phrase. He comes to himself and realizes the slaves at my father's house are better off than me. So I'll return. And he returns with very little expectation. But what does he receive? He receives this blessing. Everything. He receives this tremendous party. And so as we look at that, I think that we can connect and see ourselves in that. In whatever situation you find yourself in today, whatever struggle you may have, are you humble? What approach are you bringing to it? Do you feel, like you have something that's owed you, or do you think that you don't deserve anything that you have, and yet God continues to pour out this blessing? And so I think there's a tremendous choice really in every moment of who we're going to be in this story. We've been chosen by God. First, Peter tells us that we're a royal priesthood, that we are special, we are begotten, we are unique in the world, but do we reflect that to everyone that we meet?
Well, and you look at the beginning of the story, and it just starts with, he's got 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, give me the share of my estate that falls to me. Like, I want my inheritance and I want it now. I used to say, and I don't know that it's in that culture is the same exactly, but in today's culture, that would be, hey, I'm ready for you to be dead, and I'm going to go on about my business. I'm not going to wait for you to die. I just want my stuff now. But yet when he comes back, what did he give him? And so you mentioned the blessings. He gave him, the robe back on him, and the signet ring that signifies he has the authority in the house, and shoes so he's not a servant. Right. He comes back wanting to be a servant, but he becomes a son. And connecting that to the idea of monogenes, or the only begotten son, is, a lot of times we say, well, Jesus is the only son of God. No, we're all sons of God. We're just not on the same level. He's the unique one. He's the different one. But he calls, he's our elder brother. He is along with us, even though he's much greater, and we see him as that. There's a sense in which when we come back to the Father, we become sons like that as well. He gives us that place back in, and he adopts us in. So really powerful story for sure.
There's some offensive stuff that Paul says. I know that's shocking, but there are times where he says, you guys, talking to the Gentile Christians, you're more heirs of Abraham than these Israelites. And I'm like, whoa, that can show you that Paul didn't put much stock in political correctness. That would have
wouldn't have liked that.
Made a lot of people upset.
There's some interesting things, Travis, as you were talking. You mentioned the idea of who are you in the story, and I think there's this idea that in a sense we have qualities of all 3 that are in the story. Now, of course, we look at God being the Father, and we're never going to be God the Father, and nor do I want to be, in any place close to that. But I find it really interesting that we always say, the Father was waiting for him, but when you look down into verse 26, you've got the older brother in the field. He hears, the music and dancing, the party that's going on. So the older brother called one of his servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. Verse 28, but he was angry, the brother, and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. I find it really interesting. A lot of times we go, the father was always just waiting. And yes, he was waiting for that younger brother, but he was also trying to take care of the older brother as well. He was trying to come out and go, hey, let's understand what's happening here and really the significance of it. And it reminds me when, Revelation mentions, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Jesus is there. He's wanting that relationship, just like the father is wanting this relationship with this older brother and wanting him to have that right attitude. And I find that, a lot of comfort knowing that God is seeking us out, just like in the parable. Here's the father going out and saying, yes, I realize things are not the way that you want them, but that doesn't diminish the relationship that I want with you. And kind of in our, quarantine, Ben mentioned plague type of society that we're in the other night, it's kind of comforting to know that God's still, hey, I still want that relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned it too. I want that connectivity, with my people and with my sons and with my daughters. And so, a lot of times I think we look at this passage and for me personally, it goes, hey, don't be the big brother, like let's help receive people and acknowledge that they're there. But it's also comforting to know that he's walking me through that process, because sometimes it's difficult to want to be around difficult people, And,
I've made the comment a few times that Jesus, in John 6, when, he taught some things that the people were uncomfortable with in John 6, and they walked away from him. And his own disciples asked the question, or he asked the question to his disciples, are you going to leave too? Like, is this going to be a point of contention for us and you're going to walk away? It's almost like Jesus is saying, when people walk away, I'm going to let them walk away. And there comes a point where I think we have to do that too. As Christians, we understand that I can't control what you do. I can't control where you go. I can't control your faithfulness. And Jesus said, hey, are you guys going to leave? And I said, no, you've got the words of life. And so in this story, even though he doesn't run after the prodigal son, and we don't know that actually, he may have, obviously it's a parable, so he doesn't tell us everything, but, the father does run after us. He does look for us. He ran to the son. That's one of my favorite parts of the story is he runs to the son, but then he doesn't let the bitterness of the older son keep brewing either.
Right.
God looks out for every person. And some are coming back humbly, wanting to come home. Some people are, obstinate and frustrated by the people who the father lets come home, and the problems in that. And yet he was carrying an understanding in both of those scenarios. And as ministers, we understand that sometimes we have to do that too. We've got to be loving and caring to the people who are struggling in sin coming home. But we've also got to understand the people who are frustrated sometimes by the way we do things. This scenario is one of those times. We've got a lot of people who are saying you got to stay in, and you have a lot of churches going, no, you can't stop worshiping and you can't stop coming to the building. And our elders are having to deal with both of those things. I'm talking about elders, globally. It's just, it's one of those things we've not been through this before. At least this group of people haven't. So, we have to understand and love each other and have those conversations and be able to sort of support one another through that.
Well, and two, you've got a lot, and I guess this is kind of the whole point of why we're doing this is you've got so many people that are looking for comfort, but they're different and they're different from us and they're completely, maybe have different likes or dislikes or whatever. And it's kind of a point to all of us to go, hey, those people need the comfort that we have too. And you have a job to take that and kind of run with it and make it a part of their life. So
well, I see two overarching themes from this story. On one hand, I see extreme grace. And then on the other hand, I see extreme mercy. And so getting what you don't deserve and not getting what you do deserve, I think both of the sons have a major part in both grace and mercy. But from this story, I drew a parallel between this parable and the parable of the vineyard workers, where these guys, they wanted to go work. They were hired early in the morning, and then more and more guys got hired on throughout the day. And then when it came time for the wages, they expected more, but they were all paid the same thing. That son, when he came back, he didn't expect anything. The son that stayed, he expected way more, but they were paid the exact same. with both the grace and the mercy of what their father showed them.
Yeah, you didn't give me what, you're throwing this party for this guy, and I've been
Right.
here the whole time. You haven't done that for me.
Right.
Of course, he does encourage him at the end there and says, look, you've always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice. So it's not as though he didn't love the first son or didn't treat him in the right way. He just said, you've gotten what you've gotten all along the way. I've been taking care of you. But it's so easy for us to compare, what we do. And I love that story that you referenced. So what's the reference on that? Did you have that pulled up?
Yeah, it's Matthew chapter 20.
Yeah, Matthew chapter 20. And that story is great because I think we do, and I hear people talk about that. Are we going to get better wages? Or are we going to, have a better reward because whatever? Well, I read Hebrews 11 and Hebrews 12, and my thought is probably not, because Hebrews 12, says, or at the end of Hebrews 11, after he talks about all these different people, he says, apart from them or apart from us, they've not yet really received their reward. We kind of have a group thing coming, is what it sounds like. And somebody may debate me on that later and say something different than that. But the idea is we're all going to get to celebrate together because we've all served him. And yeah, we may have come on later in the game, but I can tell you one thing. I mean, I've been a Christian most of my life, but if you read Hebrews 11, I've done nothing like the people in Hebrews 11 did. So I don't deserve anything they've got. Yeah. And then other people, would look and make comparisons. But to me, it's like, man, if I can make it to heaven, and I believe that I can. I believe that that's
Has anybody had to forgive you more than your siblings or your family? I mean, honestly, Ben, you're in that category for me. You've had to overlook a lot for me to even talk to me, and you still do. My brother, both my brothers, my mom, my wife. Good grief. A lot of forgiveness there.
At the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that Romans 3, Paul quotes, he says, does our faithlessness negate his faithfulness? And I think that that's something you see over and over again, that I think that Israel did walk away from God. They didn't consider themselves, from God's standpoint, as sons of God anymore. John 8, Jesus talks about who their father is. Your father is the devil. I'm sure that didn't win him a lot of favor, but this idea that God wants all of us to be there. And, I love the first shall be last, the last shall be first. And I'm like, I just want to get in, guys. If all you got to go, everybody listen to this, everybody, if the Lord said everybody's in, guess who that includes? Me. I'm in, and so I think that's the attitude of, hey, we don't deserve anything that we have, and yet he continues to bless us. I know we're all quarantined off, but we've just got tremendous blessings that try to live from.
The most frustrating part about the parable, and maybe the most frustrating part about Jesus's teachings, is he never tells you the rest of the story.
Yeah.
He always just leaves it to go, okay, now, what are you going to do with it? What's going to be the decision, and kind of what you were hitting on there, Travis. What's the attitude that you're going to take now from the story? Because he told the story, to prove a point, to try and change some attitudes and change some hearts. And so now it's like, balls in your court.
And he tells us the lost coin and the lost sheep, that the angels in heaven rejoice. He says, and I tell you that in the same way, there'll be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. He basically comes down and says the same thing, or there'll be joy in the presence of angels of God over one sinner who repents. And so both those stories end with, these people coming together and celebrating, the friends of the shepherd, the friends of the lady who lost the coin. And then at the end of this story, it's like, there's no rejoicing. There's people who had a party, but then there's this guy that refuses to come in the room, and he's bitter. And it ends, like Will said, with this question of, all right, so what's that son going to do? Mm-hmm. And I think for us, that's a question. Which heart are we? Tonight, some of you watching may be the prodigal. You may be the the lost son who's looking for comfort, and we can assure you that there's a father who's wanting to comfort you. There's a father's family who some of us understand and want to celebrate with you coming home.
Yeah.
And then there's, and I would say those who celebrated were like the father. So you've got that category of people who want the lost to come home. They're looking for them. They're going to run to them. They're going to embrace them. They're going to encourage them however they can. And then you have the brother, and I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the one who is not willing to celebrate or wanting to celebrate when the lost come home. However, God loves those people too. And he went to the brother and said, hey, we need to do some things about this. How can we change your attitude? And hopefully it did. But again, it's a parable and he doesn't tell us everything.
And I've certainly been that guy. I've been the guy, you go to camp, 400,000 people go down, on Friday night. And I've been the guy who says, oh, come on, really, come on. And that means that I probably should have been down there with them, just to be honest. But, there are Eeyores of life, this is the word. I don't know if anybody gets that reference, but, there are Eeyores, it just is terrible. It's never going to be great. And, I have a hard time. I have to try and avoid those people. But, I don't want to be that guy. You said it. I want to be the guy who's celebrating like the angels are. And, there's tremendous, every day we've got breath in our lungs and life to live, we've got an opportunity to be the son, because it's the Father in heaven who determines who the sons and daughters are.
He puts the ball in our court. I mean, we're gonna do with it whatever our free will chooses. We can be like the rich young ruler who goes away sorrowfully, that we find out what happened to him, but at the same time, there's a complete opposite side of the coin that I hope we choose, and that's to head back to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He wants you to be a son or daughter. He wants you. He's done everything. Romans 8, there's my Romans 8 reference. But he wants you. He's done everything in his power to make you a son or daughter of the King. And like Blake said, it's ultimately your choice.
Yeah, and our emotions, as the counselor in the crowd coming out, but our emotions are our choice. And a lot of times we say, well, so-and-so made me mad, or this situation makes me mad. Well, it doesn't really make me. Nobody can make me do anything or feel anything that I don't allow to happen. There's things that happen that we automatically get those thoughts, but to sit around and sulk about it, I mean, this brother could have chose otherwise. He could have chose differently. And that's why the Father went to him and tried to reason with him. Look, let's look at what this picture, he kind of reframes, that's a counseling term too, reframes it a little bit and says, hey, let's look at this from a different perspective. You've been here the whole time and you've got everything of mine. In fact, everything still belongs to you because he took everything of his. Mm-hmm. So what I've got is still here for you. But we've got to celebrate because he's home and he is still my son. And so helping people in the church sometimes reframe the way that they see the lost or that they see a certain scenario is good, because it helps them deal with those emotions. Well, that makes me mad that. Well, okay, you may be upset, but let's talk about what this actually means. And, Peter reminds us he doesn't want anybody to not be saved. He's long suffering, not wishing that any should perish. So, Blake, you got any final thoughts or anything?
Well, my final thought is like it all starts with your mindset. And from a practical standpoint, I know Will has had a lot of problems with his family over the last year or so. And so, I've kind of gotten the opportunity to step up, and there's been times where I'm like, I don't know if I can do this, or I don't really want to take the youth group over to go out and eat or come back and hang out or something. But, when you're presented with an opportunity to make a choice, such as this son here in this parable, we've got to make the most of that opportunity.
Yeah.
Good point. We got a big opportunity right now for sure.
Yeah.
Travis, you got any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just challenge, if you're watching this, taking notes at home, maybe even want to comment at the bottom. I think I've been studying Genesis and reading, and man, it's just a book full of dysfunctional families, man. I mean, if you have a family and it's dysfunctional, which they all are to some degree, you ought to feel right at home in the book of Genesis. It might even make you feel better. But, if you got a chance to write down those families and kind of list them out and kind of look at what's going on there, I think that's a great thing to look at and understand that nobody has got it perfect. Nobody's got it spotless. But in the fact that Jesus makes us that, despite our dysfunction, is an awesome blessing.
Yeah, none of us are perfect, so that goes right along with that, and so we sometimes probably have some missteps when we're talking on here too, but we hope that you guys give us grace as you're watching along too. Will, you got anything?
I'm good.
Well,
Good
we're glad that you guys joined us, Will and Blake and Travis, and then we're also glad that all of you tuned in, whoever you are. And like Travis said, you can leave some comments, send some questions. You're more than welcome to do that. We'll post this on Facebook, and I'm sure some other people will share it. Also on YouTube. Right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know where you'll be watching it from, but there's probably an opportunity to leave some comments. Certainly, you can feel free to send any of the four of us a message or questions if you have them. If you find yourself as that prodigal son, I'm not going to do as we stand and sing. I was talking to somebody else earlier about that it's going to be tempting this Sunday on the video to say as we stand and sing. We're not going to do that, but if you need something, if you find yourself kind of in that place, then any of the four of us, your ministers, your elders, are happy to do that. That doesn't have to change just because we're not able to be in a building. And by the way, if you need to give your life to the Lord and be baptized, we'll break quarantine for that. So just let us know, and we'll make sure and make that happen. So we're glad that you joined us, and hope to see you. We probably will see you again pretty soon.